Well, this is not something I normally enjoy working on in the shop. It's an implement of lawn destruction. And working on these pieces of equipment bring no joy. They're a necessary evil in the battle against the ever-growing lawn. However, I got this one cheap, and because, well, you know, when the price is right, you gotta buy it. So I was hoping to basically clean it up. It had a pretty bad exhaust leak. There was an issue with the muffler that was cracked and stuff. And there was a slight oil leak, which I attributed to most likely a valve cover gasket leak, which happens on these quite a bit. And I thought maybe I could, flip it, make a couple $100 to try and, fund the sled habit. Now, if I remember correctly, this mower only had like 200 some hours on it. It was under 300. But I should have known better. It has the infamous Kohler Courage single cylinders. And guess what? The block is cracked. Now, I did give it a rough inspection when I got it, and I assumed that the crack would have been down at the bottom or somewhere where you could see it. However, this crack wasn't that bad at the time, and it was up at the top of the engine where you can't see it without pulling a bunch of accessories off. Well, if you know where to look, there it is. If it would focus. Now, here's the problem that happens with these. To buy a new engine block or something is quite expensive, and it's really not worth, these are still kind of the low-grade Cub Cadets, to spend that money on this fixing it. You could try to swap in a new Briggs & Stratton or some other engine, but that's going to take quite a bit of work. And since it's the hydrostatic drive, I don't know if it's exactly straight to the pump or if there's another belt, or that's just a whole lot of trouble I don't really feel like getting into. So we are going to attempt to hack repair this thing back together because don't really have anything to lose at this point, and see how much longer we can get this engine to keep running with a cracked engine block. I mean, worst case scenario, I just don't, publish this video when the thing blows up on the first try. So this all started from right up top here, around that case seal, and that's where the oil was leaking from. I guess as it turns out, those bolts along the top end up working their way loose, and I guess that's what allows this whole part to flex here, and that's why you get that crack. You remember, kids, crack kills. So what we're going to try and attempt to do is pull the top end of this motor off and see if we can't come up with a bracing to bolt across that crack after we, come up with a solution to keep these bolts tight and the front of this engine in place. So most of the accessories all have to come off the top of the motor, fuel pump, the throttle bracketry and stuff like that. Flywheel, of course. Well, there it is, cleaned off. Hope all the bolts are removed because we're ready to get the hammer out to pry this thing off. Don't forget to take out that key, otherwise you'll screw up the seal. And remember, we don't want to buy any parts for this job. And just like that, we're in. Try not to drop anything down on the bottom end. We'll do the best we can. But as you can see, there she is. Runs down the whole inside there. Now the good thing is there's a little bit of space behind that plastic cam gear there. Move the engine around to align the timing marks so you can put everything back together right. Well, upon further review, we couldn't actually do anything with this gear because the tension was on the exhaust valve spring when it was over there. So we rotated the engine 360 and got this cam 180 degrees out, and we remade an auxiliary timing mark over on this side so we can keep track and pull this thing out. Alright, there we go. Now we got some clear access to this, and we can unveil the master plan. We're going to basically Frankenstein stitch this case back together with some pieces of steel on the inside and on the outside, and we're going to sandwich them together and bolt them through there. Heck, maybe we'll even use this support gusset here to tie things in too. Alright, well hold up a second now. So my original plan this whole time, I figured I'd get into the case, figure out where the crack is, and sandwich it between two pieces of steel to, you know, reinforce that area there so it wasn't flexing. Well, the more I look at this, the real problem is, I guess you don't have enough support for this cylinder here. The whole thing's kind of flexing down out of the case there, since the top portion of the case is what your rigid support is that keeps this whole section of the case from wanting to bow out this way. Well, I guess that's what happens is the little dowel pin was actually missing on the engine, and once these bolts come loose, there's nothing to keep this whole, you know, big open piece of aluminum here from wanting to flex. Overstresses these areas and it cracks. Now what if we was able to make a brace, kind of like a strong back type deal, where we could probably pull these head bolts here and run a framework up and over back to some more of the bolts on the back side of the case and make a brace to actually hold this whole cylinder tighter to the bottom end of the engine. That might even be something that we can do without pulling the whole top half the motor off like we just did. So we're back topside, and here's the plan. We're going to make a bracing system that bolts onto here and runs up to the top of the head to pull this cylinder back. I mean, you think about it, you've got all the compression forces and everything else here wanting to pull this cylinder away. So we're going to counteract those forces and pre-tension this thing and pull it back. So we made some templates up here. This is the one that's going to bolt onto the head. Now, I'm sure you shouldn't loosen half the head bolts, but we don't care. This engine's shot already. And then up top, we've got these little straps here that are going to go in two of the bolt holes. So there's the crack right through there, and we're going to use these two spots back behind that to give us a pretty firm, you know, foundation for pulling. And here's those straps. We just cut them out of some flat bar, and I bent the ends up and drilled through them there. And these are what's going to bolt onto the top, sort of like that. And for the tie bolts, you could probably use all thread or really long bolts. But in this case, I've got some leftover cylinder studs that were just kind of sitting in the miscellaneous pile, and those would be perfect to put back on there to use as the tie rods. And the head bolt plate. Once again, we just marked out the head studs there, slot for clearance on the one gusset on the engine head, and we bent these back to give it a little bit nicer angle for those tie bolts to go through. And that's about all the pieces there is. Well, there it is, in all its glory. Now, if I was to do this again, I would actually tweak these bars back here to get this rod slightly over this way, so you're getting more of a straight pull back, you know, kind of like that. But we didn't, and we're not going to redo this, so this is what we've got. Better luck next time, I guess. And we just need to crank these down, and the trick is going to be how much pre-tension do you put on it. This plate's not the heaviest, it's like 1/8 of an inch thick. I could have went thicker, but again, this was what was in the scrap pile. This is going to flex a bit when we start tightening it down, so I think that'll give us some preload, and we'll just kind of go by feel as far as how much we want to compress this thing. I think it'll be hard to over tighten it because you'll just start bending and deflecting things here. Now I am going to snug up all the case bolts first, and that missing dowel pin, we just jam a bolt down through both sides of the case to act as a dowel pin. So we'll do that, line things up, snug everything up a bit before we ever start tightening these. But don't tighten these case bolts actually tight. This whole thing's got to flex back a little bit before we actually, you know, put that cover down good. All snugged up. That's a fine piece of mechanicery. Now earlier, when I would tighten up all these bolts, you could actually see the crack opening up. Well, as we were snugging down the top bolts and we started cranking on these tie rods, you could see that the gap closed up, and it's almost nothing there now. Now don't worry, we're not going to completely hack job this. We'll throw some RTV on there. Now if I could actually get to the end of the crack, I would drill a small hole to stop the crack propagation as it's running down the case, but we might just have to wait for it to get further down here so we can actually get a drill up underneath there and get it. Now I bet you're wondering, how's the fuel filter going to fit in there? The air filter housing, you know, all the shroud. Believe me, I thought about that. I just didn't care. Even the fuel, you know, pump still fits right. We just had to break a little hole in there. But that's the dirty air. So we're good. So we had to do some minor baffle delete here on the inside. Fits like a glove. See what happens. I guess you gotta use the brake. One thing that was happening before was that whole muffler assembly at the front was shaking, and it was cracking welds and breaking things apart. Well, it's barely moving now. So time will tell how long this thing makes the cut. Well, here's an update. It's still running. It's been running good. The crack hasn't spread, no more oil leaks, and the exhaust and everything is still hanging in there. So there's still no telling how long this thing's actually going to last, but being that we've actually got a couple of months of run time on it and it's still going, I'll take it any day. We're going to run this thing until it splits in half.